So let's welcome Evan Thornley to the stage, please.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks very much, everyone. I started Looksmart in 1995, and you wouldn't have put 700 people in a room to talk about tech startups. I think in 1997, the Fin Review said, and I quote, "The internet will come to be seen as the CB radio of the 90s. I think they and their ultimate owners, Fairfax, have discovered the error in that. It's fantastic to be in such a big room full of people that want to change the world. And Bill and the whole Blackbird team, this is just an incredible event, so congratulations. It's also a real honour to follow guys like Matt and just so many amazing entrepreneurs. And I feel like, when I started out, the venture guys in Silicon Valley always wanted to hire, quote, industry veterans, which I took to mean second-rate people that have been around too long. And I think I'm now an industry veteran, so that's quite terrifying. But in the 20 years that I've been doing startups, I think I'm batting 8 for 11, which is reasonably good odds across the spectrum from high-tech businesses to social enterprises to community-based organisations. So rather than tell you one particular war story, I wanted to just distill something I've learnt from the 8 that worked and the 3 that didn't, and see if that's helpful to you. The first thing I've learnt, though, and maybe this is not true for everyone, but it's certainly how I roll. I said serial co-founder. I'm not a great believer in the heroic founder model. I'm not saying it doesn't work. There are clearly some heroic founders. But most of the entrepreneurs that I talk to and come and ask for advice, and they seem to have a half-decent idea, and I say to them, so who are your co-founders? Where's your team? And if they don't have one, my usual response is go back and get yourself some co-founders and then come and talk to me. Because, it's rare that one individual has the breadth and depth of skills. If your idea's any good and your leadership's any good, there ought to be a number of other people that are willing to turn their lives upside down and join you. So, if there are no co-founders and you can't find anyone you know or care about who wants to be part of this thing, then I think the market is trying to tell you something. So I would start right there. I just want to quickly give you a reprise on some of the startups I've been involved in so you can ask any questions you want to get some context. Looksmart is not well known now, but I guess in its time was, I think we're the first Australian high-tech company to list on NASDAQ, so that was an important breakthrough, I think. I'm sorry to say it hasn't been followed all that frequently. I think our market cap peaked at about $14 billion. We also joint listed on the ASX. We returned our venture capital investors over 100 times their money, so I'm happy to say they returned my calls. And we did a company-making deal with Microsoft about 4 years in that probably was the single most powerful thing for the business. They wanted to buy the company. The problem was they wanted to buy it for less than I wanted to sell it for. And then I realised that actually what they wanted was only one part of the company, and the reason for the difference in valuation was they were valuing that one part of the company and I was valuing the rest. So I offered to license them that part of the company, and thankfully they said yes. So instead of selling for 150 when I wanted 280, we licensed them our core database and got 30 million cash up front and another 50 million over 5 years for zero equity, zero dilution, all pure revenue, all to the top line and all 100% margin revenue. That's, I think, a lesson in itself. GetUp is a different story. I was one of the founding team and donors and supporters. Many of you are probably aware of GetUp and are members of it. We just wanted to see Australian politics get a little bit more interesting and allow people who cared about stuff to have a voice. And now there's 700,000 members of GetUp, which I think is about 8 times the combined membership of all political parties in this country. So strike one for the good guys. Good Start is probably the thing I'm most proud of being involved in, and in many ways the one that I had the least involvement with. I mainly just came up with the idea and then helped put the initial consortium together, and a guy called Michael Trail, who some of you know from Social Ventures, then really led the transaction. But it's a wonderful story. So, Eddie Grove spent $3 billion of other people's money doing a roll-up of childcare centres and built the biggest childcare network in the world. but it delivered crap quality care to the kids. I'd helped co-found a public policy think tank called Per Capita that was focused on human capital economics and particularly early childhood development as the single most important driver of social outcomes, when I saw the biggest asset in the space was bankrupt, when Eddie went broke. And so it occurred to me that no one was going to buy this thing in the middle of the global financial crisis, so maybe it was time that the good guys did. So we put a consortium together of 4 charities, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence in Melbourne, Social Ventures Australia, Benevolent Society and Mission Australia. And then we raised a pile of philanthropic capital, and then we got some bank debt, and so we bought for 120 odd million what Eddie had spent $3 billion putting together, and we returned it to the hands of the charities to actually run for the good of the kids, and now it's been rebranded Good Start. It's the 3rd biggest social venture in the world. And it turns out that doing good actually works from a business point of view because the economics of childcare are principally driven by occupancy levels, just like airlines and hotels. So Eddie had it at 72% occupancy, which meant it was gasping for air. Once you actually take it over and focus on quality of care for the kids, you know, you're Bambi, and parents want to send their kids there, and your occupancy goes to 76 or 77, and the business prints cash, which you can then reinvest in more quality. So, thank you. I'm really proud of having been involved in that, though. Again, the credit for all of that work goes to Michael and Robin Crawford and now Julia Davidson and the team that run Good Start. And then the last one that I haven't mentioned here among the 11 that, you know, was our most noble failure, which some of you will be aware of and some not, was a company called Better Place, which was the hottest startup company in the world about 4 years ago. It wasn't my idea. I joined to run the Australian arm. The business was actually founded out of Israel. And we had the modest mission of ending the world's addiction to oil and building an entire soup to nuts infrastructure system to enable electric cars to get to mass adoption. You wouldn't buy a petrol car if there weren't petrol stations anywhere. You won't buy an electric car unless you can keep it charged. And that turns out to be a complex process. So a brilliant entrepreneur called Shai Agassi developed a complete system that would make that work. And we can debate it if you want. I was convinced and am convinced that that entire system made sense, that the entire business model was brilliant, and it should have worked. It actually should have worked. It wasn't easy to execute, but we could have got it done. And for a range of reasons, which I'll touch on at the end of my talk, that business failed, not because it was a bad idea, not because the technology didn't work, not because the value proposition didn't make sense to customers, and not because, as most people said when it did fail, it was before its time. It failed because of the psychological failings of the principles. And I guess that's part of my discussion today, and I'll come back to it at the end. You know, being a successful entrepreneur and leader requires many things, but the most important thing it requires is some self-knowledge. And after the Better Place experience, I decided that I was only going to work with people I liked and trusted, because life's too short to do anything else. And a precondition for trusting someone is that they know themselves, and they have some insight into their own character and their own behaviour and their own motivations. And my experience of life and of business is if you're dealing with someone who doesn't have that level of self-knowledge, whether as a business partner or a spouse or even a friend, sooner or later you're going to pay the price for their lack of self-knowledge. And that's just an important thought I wanted to leave you with today, because I'd love to announce the thing we never got to announce. Here in Australia, Better Place had a signed deal with Shell for $50 million to finance and host our battery switch stations on their prime service station locations. I think if we'd announced that deal, it would have been the shot that was heard around the world. Big oil goes into zero emissions electric cars. We had GE ready to roll to take thousands of cars into corporate fleets through their custom fleet subsidiary. It's got 120,000 cars under management. And we put together the consortium with Bosch and Continental and Futurus and the rest of the auto supply chain and did the outsourced development of the electric Commodore for Holden, so that that could get built without anyone in Detroit knowing about it, so they couldn't stop it until it was too late. There's still 9 of those things driving around, and let me tell you, that car is a low-flying aircraft. It is unbelievable. Mike Devereaux, the CEO of Holden, said it was the best car he'd ever driven. Not the best electric car, the best car. So we had all of that ready to roll here in Australia when the roof fell in our global head office as a result of the psychological failings of the principals in that part of the organisation. So that's a sad lesson, but an important one for me, and one I'd like to share with you in advance so you don't find yourself in the same situation. So that's a little bit about some of the organisations that I've been involved with, always as a co-founder. Sometimes as the leading co-founder, sometimes somebody else's idea, sometimes somebody else like Mike Trail doing the leadership work. I don't really care what role I play. What I care about is being part of a team that has that mission. I gave a TED talk a while back, you can get it online, where I tried to distill what I'd learned from startups into one simple model, and I called it the beautiful organisation, built around the golden rectangle, the ratio between the sides being equivalent to the ratio in the Fibonacci series for the mathematically inclined among you. And so I wanted to reprise a little bit of that today, but you can see it online. It's obviously, it's a TED talk, it's 18 minutes. Because I think it's still the key things that I've learned. So let me take you through each part of that. But let me say, the long sides of the rectangle is the quality of the idea or ideas and the calibre of the team. And Matt talked quite a bit about the latter. But the short sides is what holds it together. Culture and values are the DNA of your organisation. The great joy for me about being a multiple founder of organisations is you get to set the culture and values. You get to establish the DNA of the organisation. You don't get to do that when you join an existing organisation, and a lot of times you don't like the culture and it's not productive. And the final one, which is least talked about and least recognised, and which very few of you in this room have probably thought much about, is governance. And the longer I go on in life and business and organisations, the more convinced I am that governance is absolutely crucial to get right, and one of the single biggest causes of unexpected failure in organisations. So I'll talk quickly about that. So a good idea. I mean, it's kind of a statement of the obvious, but so many of us get a mediocre idea and just can't wait to get out there and implement it. When if we were truly honest with ourselves, we pitch the idea to people, we hear some objections. If we're honest and we're listening, it's not a perfect idea or suite of ideas. It has holes. And, we're so gung-ho about wanting to do it, and the business is such a projection of our personal identity and sense of mission that we go ahead and do it anyway and barrel ourselves into a brick wall, or do something that turns out okay but not great, not insanely great. And proud as I am of Looksmart, for example, and certainly proud to crack the code on getting Australian companies onto the NASDAQ, as well as on the ASX, to Matt's point, it was a mediocre idea, to be honest. And I think that if we'd thought harder earlier, we could have had a better way of thinking about that massive business opportunity called internet search and internet search marketing, and built a bigger and more durable company. Some of the other things, good start on the other hand, was a simple idea. Why don't we put childcare back in the hands of community organisations that care about kids? And actually the economics of that will be better. So it was a simple idea, but an incredibly profoundly good one. And as a result of that, the idea sold itself, and everybody came on board. The government came on board to help us outbid the private equity guys. All the professional firms did pro bono work up front to try and help us win the deal and only get paid on success. $25 million of philanthropic capital backed this deal and ultimately got a good return back into their DGR funds as a result. A really, really well thought out idea, whether it takes 1 minute or 2 years. Shai Agassi spent 2 years putting the whole suite of ideas together that became Better Place. And as I say, despite the fact that Better Place is no longer with us, I will argue to my dying day that it wasn't because the calibre of the ideas was not strong. It was the single best business idea I've ever seen, and potentially the single most transformative environmental project. It failed for other reasons, but he had done the hard work of really thinking through almost every element of how this would work with almost every constituency to make it work. A really good idea understands the economics of the business. I'm an old McKinsey guy. You've got to understand the difference between a big number and a small number. You've got to work out how you're fundamentally doing things that are transformatively different in the underlying economics. A good idea, and I think this is really powerful, has to have a social license. That's why Good Start was so powerful, because everybody wanted us to win. You know, everybody wanted Bambi to take over childcare, not Michael Milken, whom I'll talk about in a minute. But then you've got to question everything and be intellectually honest with yourself, and particularly if your initial idea wasn't such a great idea, which ours at Looksmart wasn't, at least we had the wit to morph and morph and morph and morph and stay agile. So we went from trying to build a directory and finding out that people did keyword search more than category directories, to then building a portal and then finding out that everybody else went public and had tons of money to build their portal brands and we didn't because we were stuck under Reader's Digest. And so then we turned ourselves into a white label company that built portals for everyone else. And then we realised that banner advertising was not going to be a viable long-term revenue source because it wasn't delivering value to customers. So we and a company called GoTo.com really invented together the search listings model, which now completely dominates search and is the basis of Google's revenue model. They had the wit to invent a link topology ranking algorithm that changed the nature of search. And so on and so forth. So you have to keep morphing. If your initial idea isn't good, then at least have the honesty to recognise that and turn it into one that is, which was partly Matt's point. I'd rather have a great team who can see when they've got it wrong and change it than not. Secondly, team, I just can't say enough about this, and again, I just heard Matt saying some of the same things. I'll just talk about a few things. I mean, I hire firstly for commitment. You know, you've got to wade through blood together. This is hard. You know, millionaires one day, broke the next, and you go through that cycle so many times. So unless people are all in, it's just never going to work. I try and, no matter how much I want someone on the team, I try and tell them everything that's going to go wrong or could go wrong and make sure that they're up for the risk. Some people are great people, but they don't have a risk tolerance, or they're not at the right stage in their life where they should be taking those risks as rational human beings. And I would always rather help them find that out now than trying to con them into thinking that we're not risky or they're in a better place than they are to take risk, and then, you know, have it all end in tears. You know, I'm a huge believer in every employee is a shareholder of the company. You know, on a good day, and we certainly found this at the peak with Looksmart, most of our team were earning more money from their ownership of the company than they were from their wages. So we all thought like shareholders, not like employees, and that's the way you want it to be. But again, different people are in different situations. Whenever I'm hiring people now, my standard opening on what are you going to pay me is, well, you tell me how much you need to live on and I'll tell you how many stock options you get. It's pretty simple. I don't want people trying to live on less than they need and causing stress for themselves or their families, but by the same token, if they can take the minimum that they need to be comfortable financially rather than the maximum they could get in the labour market and are willing to take the rest in upside, that's always the best option. I believe in forward recruiting. It's an interesting idea I haven't heard discussed anywhere else, but we did it at Better Place really well. We hired 42 people. It's the single best team I've ever had the privilege of being part of. And with all due respect to my dear friends, the Bassett brothers at Seek, who are old and good friends, we didn't pay a single dollar for recruiting that incredible team of 42 people. And the reason we didn't was every time somebody who I rated called me up and said, oh, look, I know this person who's thinking about doing something else and they really would love to work with Better Place, and we had 18,000 unsolicited resumes, so this was a common thing. If they came from a trusted source and someone I really respected, I would interview this person regardless. My team used to get frustrated how much time I'd spend interviewing candidates for jobs we didn't have. And, you know, some people got hired within 3 weeks. I think the record was 3.5 years. But we filled every single position from that network with forward recruiting. And it had a number of huge benefits. Firstly, we got the people we wanted, even if it took a while till we had the right job for them. Secondly, they got to work with the company they wanted to work for, which was cool. Thirdly, as you know, in any startup, by the time you've realised you need to fill some new role, it's already 6 weeks too late and you're dying. And you can't afford to wait 3 months or 4 months to get that role filled. And then if you hire badly because you just kind of have to take the best person you can find because you really need to fill it, that's always a mistake. So we filled roles immediately. You basically called them up and said, we've got a job for you now. Are you willing to come across? And almost always they'd say yes. So I really like that. Another couple of thoughts. This, I think, was one of, unfortunately, the great failings in the global head office at Better Place. Shai Agassi, who's a brilliant entrepreneur and had 3 successful startups before, had his kind of core team who'd been great people, terrific people, very clever, very talented, very committed, who'd built 3 very successful little enterprise software startups that they'd sold for hundreds of millions. But we were now trying to put $2 billion worth of metal in the ground, and that's a completely different skill set. And so while Shai was loyal to his team, he ultimately was not loyal to the mission because he wasn't able to find a different way of wanting to stick with that loyal team but actually do what we needed to do. And, you know, I'm a big believer in loyalty. And, you know, certainly through the 7 years I was involved at Looksmart, we had a bunch of people who were involved who played different roles at different times. If the business is growing super fast, often the business grows faster than the individuals themselves can grow, which is unusual. Normally it's the other way around in the labour market. So you never get rid of your loyal core founding team, but you sit down and you have a chat and say, look, the organisation's growing faster than you can, that's not your fault. You're a core part of the team, you've got a ton of stock options up front, that doesn't change. You own a big chunk of this company because you took the risk and you did the hard work. But I think the best role for you now is this role. And we're going to need to bring in somebody else to play this role. And 95% of the time, people who are loyal to the mission and to the organisation and to you personally actually agree, and it's often a relief to them. So you should always reward loyalty, but not at the expense of the mission. You know, the last 2 points I can't make strongly enough. I feel very passionate about this issue. You know, don't hire in your own likeness. The Better Place team here in Australia, as I say, is the single best team I've worked with, and it was just because of this incredible diversity of expertise. We all respected each other's expertise, and that's what made the executive table so effective. And we had the opposite happen in global head office, where we had a bunch of 30-something enterprise software guys. That didn't work. I think when we went public on the NASDAQ, well, I was the only company in Silicon Valley that had a majority of women on the senior management team, at least for a period of time. You know, the Australian labour market and the world labour market just consistently and amazingly undervalues women in so many roles, and particularly in our industry. So, I mean, just call me opportunistic. I just thought I could get better people with less competition because we were willing to understand the skills and capabilities that many of these women had. And so there's a great arbitrage there. We would give them more responsibility and a greater share of the rewards than they were likely to get anywhere else. And that was still often relatively cheap to what we would have had to pay for someone less good of a different gender. So I'm not advocating that inequality should stay, but I'm just saying there's an opportunity for forward-thinking people. Culture and values, just lots of ideas here about what type of organisation I want to work in and I find people want to work in. And most of the times we've run internal surveys, we have a high 80s or low 90s level of satisfaction among our team. So I think these cultural values work. My first is choose your own boss. Anyone who's at the bottom of the totem pole, they should choose who they want to work for, not the other way around. And if there's someone in a leadership role who nobody wants to work for, then the market is trying to tell us something. 2 heads are better than 1. I just don't believe in this sort of command and control stuff, not from the CEO, not from anyone else. You know, looking at all sides of a problem usually gets a better result. So I don't believe in it. It's not about a democracy, it's about a meritocracy. Best idea wins. A number of these are ideas I picked up when I spent 5 years at McKinsey & Company, which is a wonderful firm. And another central idea for them was not that you have a right to dissent about what the leadership wants, you have an obligation to. If you think we're doing something wrong, either business-wise or let alone, say, ethically, then you stick your hand up and say so. And rather than being punished for saying so, you should be rewarded. And I've always tried to live by that as a leader. We only work with people we like and trust. I've tried working with people I don't like and trust, and apart from the fact that I really hate it and don't enjoy it, and it sucks all my emotional energy into bad shit rather than being creative and being a good leader, it just never works. So let me give you the tip. If you're trying to deal with someone, customer, investor, colleague, and you don't like and trust them, just save yourself the grief and find a way to move on, because not only will you not enjoy it, but it won't work. Second last one, shoot one, educate 1,000. I think I once said never underestimate the importance of symbolic violence. I protect culture with a passion. We once hired a sort of number 2 person in HR. We had about 600 people at Looksmart at this stage. And about 3 weeks in, I'm starting to hear around the campfire that this person is gossiping I mean, someone in HR, of all things, gossiping about other people. And I just pulled him aside and I said, look, I didn't hire you and I don't really know you, but I'm hearing this stuff and I just want to tell you, I will not have this cancer in my organisation, so please stop or you won't be here. And like 3 days later, it happened again and I frog marched him out of the building and sent them their stuff later. And that was perhaps a little harsh, but it was deliberate. I was sending a message. We don't do that here. Not now, not ever. We don't do unethical here. We just don't. You know, it always comes back to bite you. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Governance really matters. It's so important as a CEO that you have a great board. It's lonely at the top. You need people that can question you and push you and support you as well. So many people put so little time into that. It sort of gets randomly assembled or somebody else sort of puts the board together. Take charge of getting a great board that supports you, that is diverse, that will challenge you. And always understand, at the end of the day, you'll forgive me because I spent too many years in politics, be able to conduct the mental exercise when the shit hits the fan, who's got the numbers in the room. Because sooner or later, there will be a fight. And it matters who's got votes in the boardroom. So when you're signing that first venture deal and they're taking this number of board seats and this and that, just don't ignore it. We went through a couple of real shenanigans at Looksmart, and I always took care about this. I had a great board, but we kind of had a big falling out at one point, and 3 of them ultimately left, and then I got an even better board. But it was always important to me. And I would say the number one reason I see startups fail is that they run out of runway financially. The number 2 reason is failures at the governance level. Fights between founders and venture people, fights between venture people and other venture people. It's just constant. And every entrepreneur comes to me with a crisis at a governance level, thinks they're the first person who's ever had a crisis in the governance. It's just, don't ignore it. It's one of the short sides of the golden rectangle. And the contrast is a great board is unbelievably supportive and helpful. Okay, I think you can distill startup leadership down to one line, which I have here. At the end of the day, being an entrepreneur is about convincing everyone that everyone else is in. You know, the person who hosts the party is in the power position. That's why it's so exhausting. It's so emotionally exhausting. Because you're sort of hand-waving a bit that everyone else is in, but if you say it convincingly enough, everyone believes that everyone else is in, and then they are in, and then you weren't lying. Okay? And, you know, that is so much of the skill of the leader. And a lot of that is about having a vivid enough imagination and a vivid enough vision of what it is that you're building that you can see it and you can communicate it and others can see it and want to be part of it. And then they see that everyone else wants to be part of it and suddenly it's all happening. So, you know, your early customers have to believe that it's going to happen, that they're not wasting their time. Obviously, the investors have to believe that everyone else is in and they're not going to put their money in. But start at the start. You've got to convince a bunch of people to disrupt their lives and join you. You've got to get suppliers. You know, when we started at Looksmart, we were a customer of a little thing called the Pacific National Bank, I think it was. I think Martin's in the audience. You'll remind me, Martin. Speaking of co-founders, Martin Hoskin will be on later today from Redbubble, one of my co-founders at Looksmart. We were the smallest customer at this bank when we started, and then when our initial investor, Reader's Digest, pulled out and we were broke, we were managing these guys day to day to please pay this bill, please don't pay this check. Honest, trust me, we'll get you the money. And they looked after us. And after we went public 3 years later, we had a big party with 1,300 people and had a $1 billion market cap. And the little bank manager comes up to me and says, Evan, you're our biggest customer. You just deposited 120 million in my bank. Just tell me what I can do to keep your business because, you know, we'll do anything we can. And I said, John, you've done it already, man. You were there with us in the hard times. We don't forget our friends. But, you know, you have to paint that vision for, I mean, I was always going to, you know, agencies, law firms, everyone saying, can't really afford to pay you now, but if it works, you know, we'll look after you. Now, you've got to honour that when you do it. And you try and honour it, most importantly, by being successful. But, you know, it's kind of how you get things done. Then you've got to convince the media, and you've got to convince often even government that everybody else is in, and they're the last. You know, governments won't do anything on either side of politics unless it's absolutely zero risk, right? Because, you know, one bad front page on the Daily Telegraph or the Herald Sun, and, you know, life's not worth living for those guys. So, you know, a good example of that, actually, when I cooked up the idea for the Good Start Consortium to buy ABC childcare, I was, in my brief political career, I was in the Premier's office in Victoria, and I knew that if I even mentioned it, that somebody would shut it down. Like, don't you dare do that, that's like super high risk. So I just kind of went quietly about it and got Tralee up here, and we put this thing together. And after I'd left politics, I got a call from Brumby's spin doctor, a good bloke called George Svigos, and he said, mate, paper's running a story tomorrow saying you cooked up this Good Start idea when you were in the Premier's office, and they want to know whether the Premier was aware of it. And I said, well, George, you and I both know that I did, and that the Premier knew nothing about it. But since it's all worked out great, I think you should say that I had the full support of the Premier, is 100% behind us, and I won't contradict you. And he said, yeah, no, good, mate, good, that's good, yeah. So I'm a kind of conflict-averse person, and that's a failing that I have as a leader, and part of my last part of this speech. But I do try and live by the motto that my father taught me, which is I don't start blues, but I do finish them. It's hard to get through this game without ending up in a fight with someone. Not your fault, usually, hopefully, but it happens, and that's part of the best war stories come from those. Actually, I'll come back to crooks I have known. You know, war is the continuation of politics by other means. Startups is the continuation of war by other means. Our friends at Reader's Digest, I kind of stole the entire new media budget of the person that ran new media at Reader's Digest, and it was all then given to us to run Looksmart because the chairman sort of backed us in. So that person did everything they could to stop us. And they thought the smartest way to stop us was to get our initial user interface market research tested before it was really ready, and then it would fail in testing, and then they could say, oh, look, you know, it didn't work. So we worked incredibly hard and got this absolutely beautiful interface, but it was slow as buggery, and this is 1996, right? And so we didn't, you know, it was going to test lousy. It was beautiful, but it was too slow. We knew we could fix up performance, but we'd run out of time. So we went to the test facilities, and our Reader's Digest people didn't really know what they were doing, and one of our tech guys comes in with a pizza box under his arm, a little Sun server, sneaks out the back, whacks it on the LAN. Market research starts, people are playing with the site, it's running like a rocket. Absolutely beautiful. This thing tests off the charts, we get through to the next round of funding. You know, the rest is history. Reader's Digest ended up making 10 times their money despite the way they stuffed us around, so it all ended well. I give a lot of lectures about ethics in business, and you may argue that that wasn't my finest moment, but I guess I had a context there of somebody who was trying to do the wrong thing, and we were going to not take it. So we did what we had to do, and we improved the performance of the site. You know, when we started GetUp, most of the political establishment on all sides just thought it was irrelevant. There was only one person who was really smart about it, actually, was Erica Betts, of all people. Erica, as he's lovingly known. The day we announced GetUp, Betts put the tax office, the ACCC, ASIC, and 4 government agencies on trying to stop us, the Electoral Commission. So we fought all of them and won. Conrad Black, dear Conrad. We were negotiating our Microsoft deal at the same time as we were negotiating venture money with Conrad. We decided not to tell him that we had this huge Microsoft deal because we knew that he wouldn't fund in case waiting for the deal to come. And they strung us out and we were running out of money, and suddenly the deal was getting worse and worse and worse and we were getting screwed. But then we closed the Microsoft deal the day before we were due to close Conrad's rotten deal. So then we called him up and said, look, terribly sorry, a few things have changed. We just banked 30 million from Microsoft for nothing. We kind of don't need your 12. And they didn't take that very well. And so they signed the contract and wired us the money. So we wired them the money back. I guarantee we were the only company in the history of Silicon Valley to wire the money back. And went through 4 levels of the US courts and won every round. So sometimes you've just got to fight. The last time we had a real problem on our board, I won't go into all the details, and it was partly my fault, but we ended up with a shit fight on the board. And so 3 independent directors, we're a public company, 3 independent directors resigned like on Friday. This is post-crash, by the way. This is not a happy public market to have 3 independent directors resign. And so it was kind of lawyers, guns and money all weekend. My lawyer was well connected with the Dems, so we got the deputy press secretary from the White House out on a freebie to come and help us. So we had the best spin doctors in the country, and we're sitting down all weekend trying to work out how we're going to tell the market that we just lost 3 independent directors, which is kind of clumsy. And about halfway through Saturday, I looked at them all and all the lawyers and all the spin doctors, and I said, I got this really crazy idea. What if we tell the truth? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it kind of happened like this. You see, we had a fight about this, and we won and they lost and they've left. And like there's no accounting problems and everything's kind of okay, but you know, this sort of stuff happens. It's the human race. These things happen. And by the way, we'll pre-announce that our earnings this quarter are going to beat guidance. So ultimately, we agreed that telling the truth was a good idea, and we went out there and I, you know, the market, 3 independent directors resigning. But we pre-announced earnings was going up, and lo and behold, we then got on a call with the analysts afterwards, and they're like, why should I believe what you've said? And I said, what, you think I'd make this up? It's not a very flattering story to me, it's just the truth, okay? Anyway, the stock ended up going up rather than down. So do what you have to do to win those fights, because you're going to have them. I'm nearly out of time for this, but so crooks I have known. If you are unethical, sooner or later it will catch up with you. Uncle Conrad ended up going to jail for a whole bunch of other reasons. Eddie, I don't think has ever gone to jail, but I mean, will be fighting it for the rest of his life. Michael Milken, you remember the movies Wall Street? That was Michael Milken. He's now reformed, he's rehabilitated, he's doing stuff in childcare, and he wanted to buy ABC Learning and looked like being the lead bidder with his shop out of the US. So the Special Operations Branch managed to get a front page headline in the Daily Telegraph that said, and I quote, "Don't sell Australia's children to convicted criminal Michael Milken." And I'm happy to report that their bid didn't proceed after that. This is a beauty. I remember going to a meeting with another NASDAQ-listed startup called Homestore.com. And we were trying to cut a distribution deal. You know, you take some of our stuff, we'll take some of yours. And they started saying, yeah, actually, we can book that as revenue, right? Like, it's like kind of barter deal, but it's not really, and no one needs to know. And I'm sort of like, we don't really do that. Like, our revenue is really revenue. And they're like, but come on, man, we're valued on earnings, the stock will go up, it's a win-win. And we're just sort of like gently backing out of the room. 3 months later, these guys are in jail. So, you know, when your gut tells you something's wrong, something is wrong. Henry Blodgett, this is my favourite story. Henry was the big internet analyst at Merrill Lynch. We got along pretty well. He'd given us some good ratings, and then suddenly we got slammed. Blodgett just out of nowhere issues this thing that's slamming us. And I'm like, man, what do we do to deserve that? Then there was that whole Wall Street thing that Elliot Spitzer, before he was found with the wrong people in the wrong bedrooms, was prosecuting. And I'm reading through the transcripts of some of the stuff about Blodgett, who got busted. And there in black and white is the trial between him and Ted Meisel, who's a great bloke actually, but the CEO of GoTo.com, one of our closest competitors, where these clowns were promising that if GoTo gave Merrill Lynch the lead of their book for their secondary offering, Merrill Lynch's research would come out and slam Looksmart. So, yeah. I don't think this bloke is a crook, but this is just a fun story. I'm nearly finished. When we were fighting with Uncle Conrad, you know, it was Clinton era, so all the neocons and all the conservatives were sort of off trying to get corporate jobs somewhere waiting for the next Bush presidency. So Richard Pearl, who had negotiated the SALT II weapons treaty with the Soviets, it's a reasonably serious guy, was actually running the venture arm for Uncle Conrad, which is kind of weird. So we go to meet with his offsider, Phil. I can't remember his last name. All I remember is we called him Spooky Phil. And we're trying to, like, they're going to give us $12 million. We're making small talk in a cafe in Maryland somewhere. And, oh, what did you do before this? Oh, you know, I was in so-and-so, New Mexico. And we're like, oh, what did you do there? That's classified. Okay. Anyway, we ended up going through 4 rounds of the US courts with Richard Pearl. I don't recommend doing that with an Under-Secretary of Defence as a general rule. Finally, great golfers I have known. That was fun. 2 things I learnt playing 18 holes with the chief. 3 things, actually. The first one is we jumped in the car together. He's driving. We swing down around the first hole at Stanford Golf Course. He nearly hits a tree. And I'm thinking, what do I say to this guy? I turned to him. I said, you don't do a lot of your own driving, do you, Mr. President? But I did pick up 2 things in the course of that. And as a mate of mine said, mate, you got more time with him than John Howard did. The first thing was, and this is actually profound, and it leads to my conclusion. He said, you know, son, in my business, it's very important to take criticism seriously, but none of it personally. And I think that that's an important lesson in life. And the other thing he said was, you know, in my line of work, I can manage my own time. So I always get to Chelsea's things at school and the ballet rehearsals and everything, and then I work all the rest of the time. And as entrepreneurs, you can manage your own time, and that is one of the joys of it. You will work twice as hard, but actually you can stay true to the people that you care about. And if this bloke can do it, then you certainly can. I won't talk about the trophy cabinet too much. It was fun. I did want to make one final point, though. Be careful what you wish for.
Make it quick.
I will. Because I didn't get to the point we were going to get to, but you're going to ask me that question, and we'll do that. After we went public and we had a $1 squillion valuation and I was number 6 on the risk list and all that sort of stuff, got a visit from my private bankers at Goldman, and they said, oh, a lot of our clients like to talk to the security people after this sort of thing. And I'm like, okay. This ex-CIA guy comes over and sits me down and says, let me tell you about the 12 children of internet CEOs who've been kidnapped in the last 12 months. I'm like, this is not a happy story. That's kind of what happens, apparently. It's mainly a business. Hopefully, usually no one gets hurt. And then they looked at the house we were living in and said, you're moving, we can't defend you here. And we moved up into a quiet place up in Marin County, the wealthiest hippie commune on earth. So be careful what you wish for. All that glitters isn't gold. And even when you're successful, the things that really matter can be more at risk than they were before. So that's a lesson. What we're going to talk about, and Bill's going to ask me about, is this part. Because I actually think this is the message I want to leave you with, which is that all the other stuff is not going to matter much if you don't have the self-knowledge to understand why you are doing what you're doing and how that impacts your behaviour and your leadership with other people. So I've thrown it to you, Bill, so you can ask me.
Well, thanks very much. Awesome. Great job. So I'm so glad that you're here today, Evan, because he's done a whole lot of things, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I'm sure we could talk all day. We are running a little bit behind on schedule, so we'll just do a few questions. But one of the things I was interested in is, look, you've built all kinds of teams. I mean, you've built high-powered teams to run businesses, high-powered teams in politics, high-powered teams in profits and non-profit businesses. What's the difference, or what's the similarity?
I try to make them all values-based. I don't think there is much of a difference.
Right.
If people don't have a shared set of values about how you treat other people, about how you conduct yourself as an organisation in the world, then that will create massive internal tension in the organisation.
Yep.
And it's just not fun.
Yeah.
So, I think that the distinction between business and sort of community and political is overrated. They're all trying to change the world. They might have different business models, but building strong, united teams with strong values is a constant across all of them.
Yeah, and I want to ask you one other question about DNA and culture, because I think I agree with you. I think it's very underrated. So can you just take just a couple of minutes and talk a little bit more about DNA and culture. Why is it important to set that DNA and that culture early on? And how do you keep it up as the organization scales? And how do you scale yourself?
Yeah. Look, it just seems to be the case. I call it DNA because those norms, cultural norms of an organisation are usually set in the first 18 months.
Yep.
And they almost never change, at least not for the better. They can get worse, but they rarely get better. The more stable and confident an organisation is, the more people want to play internal politics because they can.
Right.
Because they're not threatening the future of the business, which is why government and large corporates are just all consumed with internal politics because they don't actually have to worry about survival. So if you don't at least start out with a great set of values, you're in deep trouble. I think the longer I go on, the more I feel that the principal role of the leader is to set and enforce those values. And of course, the best way to do that is to live by those values.
Yep.
I hope I've never asked anyone on my team to do anything I wouldn't do.
Yep.
Or wouldn't ask myself to do or have already done. I used to say my family's my first priority, my business is my second priority, I don't have a third priority. And I felt that was the right set of priorities for everybody else on the team.
Right.
I think there is a danger that as the organisation grows and that you as a leader get stale, that it atrophies and that other behaviours start becoming dominant. And succession planning is everything. And it's probably one of the things I got wrong at Looksmart. It's not a criticism of my successor. It just didn't work out right. And part of the reason was that person was a fantastic number two, just a fantastic COO. We were a great team together. But I did the culture and values things and he did a lot of operational things. And then when he had to take over the culture and values role, it wasn't his shtick. Yeah. And actually, it didn't work out at all. Right. And quickly.
Okay, we'll do a couple of quick questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up. So one question is, will Tesla succeed where Better Place failed? You have a thought on that?
Yeah, wow. I mean, two of the smartest entrepreneurs in the world, Elon Musk and Shai Agassi.
Yeah.
I don't know Elon, but I do know Shai very well, and I know why we failed. And it was really because Shai ultimately found it too comforting to be surrounded by people who adored him than to be surrounded by people who had the expertise necessary to succeed. Yeah. And when confronted with that and the reality that if he didn't get out of that comfort zone, the mission would fail, it turns out that his psychological needs were more important than the mission. Now, I don't know Elon well, but I'm guessing that's not how he plays. Yeah. The great shame is, of course, the two should have worked together. We should have built the infrastructure and Elon should have built the cars. Right. And I don't know that Elon can ever get that thing to mass market without infrastructure, and he's starting to build his own, and I think that's going to be hard. So, I mean, you could never count him out. He's such an incredible entrepreneur. Ego's gotten... Those two elephants could never be in the same room together. They were about the same age. Right. This town ain't big enough for both of us. Yeah. We could have completely changed the world if those two guys could have got along.
Yeah. Last question here, and I think it's a good one, is can you assemble a board of advisors if you're still very, very early with very modest revenues? In other words, how important, let's change that a little bit, but even if you are a very young company and you've got a great vision, but that's about all you have, can you attract really good advisors around you?
Absolutely. I think if you have a great vision, and when I say a great vision, both as a business vision and hopefully that does something good in the world, and you can get a great team around you. Yep. I'm starting to be one of those industry veterans now that likes helping other people rather than doing it themselves, so I'm beginning to understand the mentality of the mentor. People that have been successful love helping other people. It's kind of, what else have you got to do? Once you've done it a few times, you want to help other people be successful. There's no shortage of experienced people with a ton of wisdom that want to help. And they're often excited. Harrison Young was kind enough to accept my invitation to be chair of Better Place Australia. And he was chair of the National Broadband Network. He's on the board of the Bank of England. He's on the board of the Commonwealth Bank. Was former vice chairman of Asia for Morgan Stanley. And Better Place Australia with like 13 people when he agreed to join. It was the most fun board he had. Right. Absolutely loved
it.
Exciting.
So he can buy into the vision.
Yeah, the vision was compelling and the team were just a great, energetic, decent group of people, and so it was fun. So I encourage you, again, if you can't get good advisors, the market is trying to tell you something.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's fantastic. Really learned a lot. Evan, Wonderful. Excellent job.